All right, so today we're diving into the world of knot theory.
Yeah.
With a paper called A Recursive Relation in the Complement of the 2p12 Torus Knot.
Okay.
Now, I know you're thinking
Really?
knots, really,
Yeah.
for deep dive.
Right.
But trust me, this paper, it's like a treasure map
Okay.
to some really cool math.
It's true, yeah.
So if this paper is our map, what treasure are we looking for?
Well, imagine like a donut.
Okay.
That's our torus. And then picture a knot, like wrapped around it a bunch of times.
Got it.
That's our torus knot.
Okay.
This paper is all about the spaces around those knots and the crazy knots we can tie in those spaces.
So like knots inside the donut hole.
Exactly.
This is already hurting my brain.
It's pretty wild.
But how do we even study that, like, mathematically?
Well, we got to find ways to describe the knots using math, right?
Okay.
This paper uses something called colored Jones polynomials.
Colored Jones polynomials.
Yeah. Think of them like mathematical fingerprints for these knots.
Huh.
They reveal all these hidden properties.
So what do they look like? These polynomials.
Oh, they're pretty intense. Lots of symbols and exponents.
Right. And you said colored. What's that about?
Oh, yeah. That colored just means we're looking at those fingerprints, those polynomials,
Right.
through all these different mathematical lenses. It's like having a multi-tool.
I see.
It helps us really understand these knots from different angles.
Okay, so what can these polynomials tell us? Can they tell me if I'd be good at macrame?
Maybe not macrame, but like they can tell us how hard it is to untie a knot. Or if you can turn one knot into another, without cutting it.
Oh, wow.
And get this paper, they found a shortcut to figure out these polynomials.
Really?
Yeah.
So like a formula.
Exactly. A formula that like governs how these knots behave.
That's amazing.
It's pretty huge.
Yeah. Math is all about finding those shortcuts.
Exactly.
So they don't have to calculate every single polynomial by hand.
Right.
That's wild.
Oh,
so how did they
sure.
find this shortcut? Just stare at equations until it hit them.
Not quite. They use these tools, like Chebyshev polynomials.
Oh, yeah. Vaguely.
You might remember those from like high school algebra.
Yeah, sine waves and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. They model these repeating patterns.
Wow. Never thought I'd use those for, knots.
It's all connected.
So they used Chebyshev polynomials, but there was something else, right?
Oh, yeah. They also used the Kauffman Bracket Skein Module.
What?
It sounds complicated, but it's basically a specialized toolkit just for analyzing knots.
Oh, okay.
Specifically in these like abstract spaces we're talking about.
Got it. So all theoretical, no actual spring and knots involved.
Yeah, all theoretical, but they still visualized everything.
Yeah.
The paper even has diagrams. It's really cool.
That is cool. So they cracked the code, but why does this all matter?
Well, it actually has implications for tons of fields. Like for one, topology.
Topology. Isn't that like the donut coffee mug thing?
Exactly.
Like how you can squish one into the other?
Yeah. It's about the core properties of shapes, not just how they look. And believe it or not, knot theory, especially with these colored polynomials, it pops up in quantum physics.
Quantum physics. Wait, so this knot stuff is connected to, like, the universe?
Yeah.
How does that even work? Okay, so we're talking about using knots to understand, like, the universe. That's wild. How does that even work?
Yeah, so it's kind of complicated, but knot theory can help us, model certain things in quantum systems.
Okay.
Especially in this field called topological quantum field theory. Have you heard of that?
I have not.
Basically, we use knots as like a way to picture these really complex interactions.
Oh, okay.
That are happening at the, at the quantum level.
So knots are like the string theory of math.
Kind of, yeah. They help us visualize those tiny things we can't even see.
That's so cool.
But it gets even crazier. This might even help us understand DNA.
Wait, really? From knots to DNA? How does that work?
Well, DNA, it's basically like this long, twisted up molecule, right?
Right.
And the way it's knotted and coiled up, that affects, like, how all that genetic information is stored and used.
Yeah.
So knot theory can help us figure out those complex structures.
Wow. Okay, so from one knotty problem, we've got the universe and DNA. Amazing. I'm seeing how math connects everything. But this is just one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, exactly. There's still so much more to explore.
Exciting. So let's back up a sec. You mentioned this paper found a shortcut for calculating.
Oh, yeah, the colored Jones polynomials.
Right. How does that work again?
So instead of figuring out every single one of those polynomials the hard way,
Right.
we can use this this recursive relation.
The domino effect thing.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah, that's huge. So we can use what we already know.
Exactly. You plug in the value of one polynomial, and bam, you've got the next one.
Like a cheat code for math. Okay, this paper looked at knots in that donut space.
Right.
Right. And used that Kauffman bracket thing.
Right. The Kauffman bracket version of the polynomial, yeah.
So where does the real colored Jones polynomial fit in? The one connected to all this cool stuff.
Ah, good point. So the paper uses this thing called the Kauffman Bracket Skein Module as its framework.
Okay.
It's a bit simpler than the Reshetkin-Turayev theory.
The what now?
It's a mouthful, I know, but that's where the colored Jones polynomial we really care about comes from.
Okay, so two different frameworks, but both about knots. But this paper, they didn't look at that other more complex side.
Not directly, no. But that's the cool part. What they found with this recursive relation, we can actually use that same logic for the colored Jones polynomial.
Hold on. We can use what they learned about this Kauffman thing and apply it to the real colored Jones polynomial, even though they didn't do that themselves.
That's exactly it. That's why this paper is such a big deal.
I see.
It's like they gave us the key, and now we can unlock even more.
Okay. I'm starting to get the big picture.
Yeah.
But how do we actually do that? Go from this relation to working with the colored Jones polynomial in this whole other framework.
Well, it's all about finding the connections, right? Translating things.
Right.
The colored Jones polynomial in this other theory, it's like a deluxe version of the Kauffman one.
Deluxe.
Yeah, more complex, more nuanced, but still a tool to understand these knots.
Got it. So we're upgrading our tools, but how do we make sure they all work together? So how do we make sure these tools actually, work together? Don't want to break math or anything.
Right. Well, that's where this paper gets really cool. It shows this key connection between the Kauffman bracket polynomial, the one they used, and the full-on colored Jones polynomial in that Reshetkin-Turayev theory.
Okay.
Like a universal adapter for our math toolkit.
Ooh, I like that. So we can switch between them, no problem.
Exactly. We can use what we learned about that recursive relation.
Right, with the Kauffman thing.
Yeah, and apply it to the upgraded colored Jones polynomial because of that connection.
Mind-blowing. But how does that actually look, though, when we're doing the math?
All right, so we use these special mathematical things called operators. Think of them like tools to move and resize our polynomials,
Okay.
So we use those and the recursive relation, and we get this a recurrence polynomial.
Recurrence polynomial.
Yeah, it's like a shortcut equation. It tells us everything we need to know about any colored Jones polynomial for that knot.
Wait, so we made a polynomial to understand a different polynomial.
Basically.
My brain hurts.
It's like Inception, but with math.
Totally. But if this is so important, did they actually find this recurrence polynomial? Or?
I did. It's in the paper.
No way.
Yeah, they did all the hard work. And now we can use it to figure out all sorts of things about these crazy knot invariants.
It's like a GPS for knot theory. No more getting lost in calculations.
Exactly.
This has been awesome. But where do we go from here? What are the big unsolved mysteries now?
Well, we have this amazing tool now, right? This recurrence polynomial.
Right.
It can help us understand the colored Jones polynomial and how it might connect to, things like quantum physics, maybe even DNA.
Right.
So now we can ask even bigger questions. Can we find these shortcuts for other types of knots?
Oh, good question.
What other patterns are hiding out there?
Right.
And how can we make our math tools even better so we can keep unlocking these secrets?
It's like every answer leads to more questions. That's what I love about math. It's all connected.
Totally.
Well, thanks for taking us on this wild ride through knot theory. This was a good one.
Glad you enjoyed it.
Until next time. All right, so today we're diving into some pretty knotty math, literally. We've got this paper, and the title, well, it's a mouthful. A recursive relation in the complement of the 2p12 torus knot.
Yeah, that's a bit of a tongue twister.
It sounds kind of intimidating, to be honest.
It's definitely a mouthful, but it's really a fascinating area of math, and surprisingly, it has some cool applications in the real world.
That's what we've got you for,
to
break it all down. So maybe we could start with the basics, like what do we even mean by the complement of a knot? I feel like that's got to be key to understanding, well, any of this.
You're absolutely right. It's fundamental. Picture a simple knot, the kind you might tie in a rope. Now imagine the space surrounding that knot. just the air around it, That's the complement.
So we're not talking about the knot itself, but like the empty space around it.
Exactly. And believe it or not, the shape of that empty space can tell us a lot about the knot itself.
Okay.
Think of it this way. Some knots are way more complicated than others, right?
Oh, yeah.
Some are like super easy to untie, and then others, they just get tangled up in this crazy way, almost impossible to unravel.
I am definitely guilty of tying those impossible knots.
Chuckle. Well, that complexity, that difference in how easily they tangle or untangle, it's actually reflected in that surrounding space, that complement. And mathematicians like Sunday Esebre and Răzvan Gelca, the authors of this paper, they're really interested in this whole relationship between a knot and its complement.
And they're using some pretty intense math to do it, from what I hear. We're talking Chebyshev polynomials, Skein modules. Could you give us a crash course in those?
Absolutely. Now, I know those terms might sound intimidating, but bear with me. Chebyshev polynomials, they're basically like, imagine mathematical waves.
Yeah.
You know how a wave has those peaks and troughs?
Yeah.
Chebyshev polynomials, you can kind of visualize them in a similar way. They have these repeating patterns of highs and lows, and you've probably seen them visualized before, even if you didn't know the name. They're used a lot in computer graphics, even in sound editing, to create those really smooth curves and transitions.
So, like, the mathematical equations behind those perfectly smooth transitions in my favorite sci-fi movie.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And in knot theory, we use these polynomials to like help describe the shape and properties of those knot complements we were talking about.
Okay, that's actually pretty cool. But what about these Skein modules?
Oh, yeah.
That one sounds even more
It tickles.
intimidating.
It's not as scary as it sounds, promise. Think of a Skein module like a set of building blocks, or maybe a specialized toolkit that mathematicians use to, analyze knots. Let me give you an example. So you find this like super complex knot, right? Maybe it's been tangled up for years.
Right.
And a Skein module, it gives us a way to kind of systematically simplify that knot.
Okay.
Like untying it one small step at a time.
Huh.
So we can use these modules to, break down those complex knots into these simpler pieces, which makes them much easier to study and understand,
So it's like having a set of instructions for untangling even the most stubborn knot.
Exactly. And that's exactly what Esebre and Gelca, what they've done in this paper, is they've kind of developed a new tool for that toolkit, They found this, what they call a recursive relation within the complement of a specific type of knot. It's called a torus knot.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there for a second because I realize we haven't actually talked about torus knots.
Of course, yeah.
So could you give us a really quick explanation before we dive into the whole recursive relation part?
Sure. A torus knot, basically, it's a knot that you can draw like on the surface of a torus.
Okay.
Which is, like a donut shape.
Okay.
So think about like wrapping a string around a donut a few times. That's basically the idea.
Okay, I can visualize that. So this paper is looking at the space around these like donut knots and finding a recursive relation.
Yeah.
I have to admit that still sounds a little abstract to me.
It might sound abstract, but it's actually a pretty big deal. Because imagine you have this like incredibly intricate knot, right? And this recursive relation, it's like finding this hidden pattern within that knot.
Okay.
Like a mathematical shortcut, you could say, that helps us understand how that knot is structured.
So it's like we're finding the like underlying code that dictates how the knot is formed.
That's a great way to put it. And what's even cooler is that this relation, it doesn't just apply to like one specific torus knot.
Yeah.
It has like implications for a whole class of knots. You
Right.
know, it gives us this whole new lens through which we can examine like even the most complex knots in these really new ways.
That's fascinating. And speaking of looking at things in new ways, I know you wanted to talk about colored Jones polynomials.
Yes.
What are those and how do they fit into all of this?
This is where things get really visually interesting, even though it's theoretical.
Okay.
So we have these like intricate knots, right? And we're trying to understand like their structure, their properties.
Right.
Now, instead of just using, regular polynomials, which can be kind of bland, we can use something called colored Jones polynomials.
Colored polynomials.
Yeah.
Like, are we breaking out the mathematical crayons now?
I love that analogy. Yeah, you're on the right track.
Yeah.
It's like instead of just having numbers and variables, we're assigning colors to different parts of a knot.
So like we're like highlighting different aspects of the knot with different colors.
Exactly.
But the colors aren't just decorative.
Absolutely not. these colors, they actually carry mathematical information.
Right.
They like reveal these hidden patterns and relationships within the knot's structure.
Wow.
It's like each color is highlighting a different aspect of the knot's like personality, you could say.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing is
This new recursive relation that Esebre and Gelca discovered, it gives us a really powerful tool to calculate and understand these colored Jones polynomials, even for these incredibly complex knots.
yeah, it's like we've been given this new mathematical language,
Okay.
that lets us decode all those hidden messages that are kind of encoded within these knots.
So I'm definitely getting a sense of how groundbreaking this research is, but we've been talking a lot about the abstract math here.
Right.
So let's bring it back down to earth for a sec. What's the so what for our listeners? Like,
Yeah.
why should they care about these intricate knots and their mathematical secrets?
That's a great question. And it's something I'm really passionate about because, you see, knot theory, it might seem kind of abstract on the surface.
Yeah.
But it's actually like deeply interconnected with so many other fields,
Okay.
For example, it plays a really crucial role in physics, especially in areas like quantum mechanics and string theory.
So we're talking about like the very fabric of the universe here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
These mathematical knots and their properties, they're actually helping physicists model the fundamental building blocks of reality. And then there's biology. DNA, the blueprint of life itself, it can get all knotted up, believe it or not.
Really? I did not know that.
Yeah, it's true. And knot theory is helping us understand how those DNA knots, how they form, and crucially, how they can be unraveled, which has huge implications for gene editing and understanding how cells function.
Right.
And if that's not enough, knot theory is even being used in cryptography these days.
Okay, now you're really blowing my mind. How does that even work?
Well, the unique properties of knots, especially those like really complex ones we talked about, they make them super useful for developing like really secure encryption methods.
Okay.
It's like using a knot to, tie up information so tightly that only someone with the exact mathematical key can untie it.
So the next time I'm like struggling to untie a knot, I should imagine I'm battling a quantum computer.
Relax.
There you go. But seriously, this research by Esebre and Gelca, it's really like pushing the boundaries of what we know about knots and these hidden connections to like the world around us.
Yeah.
And it sounds like we're really just scratching the surface.
That's the beauty of it. This one paper focused on one specific type of knot. It's really opened up a whole new avenue of research. It's given us these new tools, a new understanding that could unlock, secrets about a whole universe of other knots and the spaces around them.
So what's next? Like, what are you most excited to see explored further in this field?
Ooh, that's a tough one. There's just so much potential.
Yeah.
But one thing I'm really interested in is how these new discoveries in knot theory, how they might like further our understanding of the universe's fundamental forces, like could these knots hold the key to unifying quantum mechanics and general relativity? It's a long shot, but even just the possibility is super exciting.
Yeah. It's amazing to think that something as like seemingly simple as a knot could hold such like profound secrets.
Right.
It really does make you look at the world a little differently.
That's what I love about math and about science in general.
Yeah.
It's all about uncovering those hidden connections, those surprising links between things that seem totally unrelated.
Well, on that note, I think we've given our listeners plenty to ponder today.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
Just this. The next time you tie your shoelaces or untangle a necklace or even like just look at a pretzel.
Right.
Take a moment to like really appreciate the hidden complexity of those knots, because as we've seen today, those knots and that space around them, they might just hold the key to some of the universe's biggest mysteries.
That is a great point to end on. Thank you so much for taking a deep dive with us today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us. We'll see you next time for another deep dive. I always thought knots were just like a nuisance.
Yeah.
Tangled headphones or shoelaces that won't cooperate.
Right.
But then you learn that mathematicians use them to explore some really profound ideas.
Yeah. It's true. Knot theory is a fascinating area of mathematics.
It is.
And today's deep dive, we're going right to the cutting edge.
Okay.
We're looking at a research paper that uncovers like a hidden pattern within a certain type of knot.
Okay. And the paper is called A Recursive Relation in the Complement of the 2p12 torus knot.
Yes.
I have to admit, even the title has me a little intimidated.
I bet. Well, we'll break it down.
Okay.
You're probably already familiar with torus knots.
Right.
They get their name from the torus, that donut shape. Imagine a string looping around a donut a specific number of times before connecting back to itself. That's a torus knot.
Okay.
I'm picturing it. But this paper focuses on a specific kind of torus knot, right? What's special about the 2p12 variety?
Good catch. That notation, 2p12, tells us exactly how the string is wrapping around the donut.
Okay.
The 2p1 part refers to the number of times the string goes around the donut's hole, and the 2 describes how many times it twists around the donut itself. Even a small change to those numbers creates a completely different knot with its own unique properties.
So changing those numbers is like changing the knot's DNA in a way.
That's a great way to think about it.
Okay.
Now, this paper focuses on something called the complement of the knot. Imagine the donut submerged in water. A complement is the water itself, filling every space the knot doesn't occupy.
Okay, so we've got our donut, the string making the knot, and now the water surrounding it is like this complement space.
Exactly.
Is that where this whole recursive relationship thing comes in?
Exactly. The researchers discovered a fascinating pattern within that complement space.
Okay.
They found that certain values describing the knot structure are related in a repeating, predictable way, kind of like a domino effect. Each element is linked to the ones that came before it. That's what we call recursive relationship.
So you're saying these mathematicians found a pattern of a repeating domino effect inside this knot
Yes.
that helps us understand its unique properties much faster. That's pretty slick.
Precisely. And to unlock this pattern, they used a tool you might not expect, something called Chebyshev polynomials.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying these polynomials, which are usually used in fields like, say, finance, are the key to understanding these knots? That's wild.
I know.
Tell me more about these Chebyshev things.
They're named after Pafnuty Chebyshev,
Okay.
a brilliant Russian mathematician who made contributions to a wide range of fields. What's remarkable is how these polynomials, which often pop up in probability or approximation theory, unexpectedly appear here in the realm of knot theory.
Wow.
It just goes to show the interconnectedness of mathematics.
It's like finding a secret passageway between two completely different rooms in a mansion. But how do these Chebyshev polynomials actually work to reveal this hidden pattern?
Think of it this way. The researchers used visualizations, sort of like mathematical sketches, to understand the knot's structure. These Chebyshev polynomials acted like a special lens, allowing them to see the repeating patterns and relationships within those visualizations.
Okay, I'm starting to get the gist of it. We've got our knot, its complement, and these Chebyshev polynomials helping us see a hidden recursive pattern. But the paper also mentioned something called colored Jones polynomials. What are those all about?
Think of colored Jones polynomials as mathematical fingerprints for knots. Every knot has a unique colored Jones polynomial, which helps mathematicians distinguish it from other knots and understand its unique properties. And what's really cool is that this recursive relationship the researchers discovered provides a shortcut for calculating those fingerprints.
So instead of figuring out each fingerprint individually, this recursion gives them a much faster way to predict and understand those colored Jones polynomials.
Exactly. It's about finding deeper patterns and shortcuts within complex systems, which can have ripple effects in other areas of mathematics.
This is blowing my mind a little bit. It's like those repeating patterns you see in mosaics, but on a much deeper mathematical level. But how did the researchers actually prove that this recursive relationship exists? Was it a lucky hunch, or did they have a clever method?
They did have a clever method, and it involved a bit of mathematical flipping. Let's take a closer look at the diagrams in the paper to see how this flipping technique works. These diagrams represent the knot's complement. Remember, that's the space surrounding the knot itself. The researchers focus on specific sections of this complement and essentially created a kind of mirror image of those sections. By doing this flipping, they can analyze how the relationships between different parts of the knot changed.
So they're looking at these mirror images and trying to spot patterns, right? But how does that actually prove anything about the recursion?
They used a powerful technique called inductive reasoning.
Okay.
It's like building a sturdy brick wall.
Right.
Start with a solid base and then show that each new layer rests securely on the one before it.
Okay.
In this case, the researchers first demonstrated that the recursive relationship holds true for a simple version of the knot.
So that's like their base layer of bricks.
Exactly. Then they showed that if the relationship holds true for one version of the knot, it also holds true when you flip a section of the knot's complement to create a slightly more complex version.
Let me see if I'm wrapping my head around this. They're saying if the pattern's there in the simple version and it's still there after we flip things around and make it more complex, then this recursion idea is probably rock solid.
You've got it. They essentially proved that this repeating pattern, this recursion, isn't just a fluke. It's woven into the very fabric of these torus knots.
Okay, that's incredibly elegant. But let's step back for a second. Why should we care about this recursion? What makes it so important in the grand scheme of knot theory?
It all goes back to those colored Jones polynomials, the fingerprints that help us understand and classify knots.
Right.
This recursive relationship gives mathematicians a powerful new tool, a more efficient way to calculate those fingerprints.
Okay.
Instead of calculating each one from scratch, they can use this recursive pattern to predict them.
That's like having a shortcut through a dense forest. You save time and energy, and you might even discover some hidden wonders along the way.
Exactly. This research opens up new avenues for exploration in knot theory.
Yeah.
It's like they've illuminated a previously hidden pathway, and who knows what we might find as we venture further down that path.
It's pretty amazing to think that something as seemingly abstract as a knot could hold so much mathematical depth and complexity.
Yeah.
But this isn't just some intellectual exercise, right? Didn't the paper hint at potential applications in other fields?
That's what makes this research even more exciting. Understanding knots and their properties has surprising applications in various fields, from understanding the structure of DNA to unraveling the complexities of protein folding.
Wow! I never would have made that connection. It's like this research is giving us a whole new lens through which to view the world around us.
Precisely.
Wow.
And while this paper focuses specifically on torus knots, this type of recursive relationship might exist in other geometric structures as well.
Right.
It's like finding a rare plant in your backyard.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if there are more out there just waiting to be discovered.
That's such a great analogy. This research is just the tip of the iceberg. There could be a whole world of mathematical recursion waiting to be explored. It makes you wonder what other seemingly simple mathematical concepts might have these far-reaching connections, just waiting to be uncovered.
And that's the beauty of this kind of research. It often leads to more questions than answers.
Right.
It's not just about, understanding one specific type of knot or one recursive relationship. It's about opening up new pathways of exploration and uncovering these deeper truths about the mathematical universe.
It's like we've been given a glimpse into a hidden world, and now we can't help but wonder what other secrets are out there just waiting to be discovered.
Exactly. And the tools used in this paper, like those Chebyshev polynomials,
Right.
they might hold the key to unlocking even more mysteries in the future.
It's incredible to think that a tool developed by a 19th century mathematician is now helping us unravel the complexities of knots in a way that could impact fields like, genetics and biochemistry.
Yeah.
It really highlights the enduring power and unexpected interconnectedness of mathematics.
It's a testament to the fact that even in these seemingly abstract fields, like knot theory, there's often a tangible connection to the world around us.
Well, I think we've all learned a lot today, from the intricacies of torus knots to the power of recursion and the surprising versatility of Chebyshev polynomials. Who knew that something as simple as a knot could hold so much mathematical depth and potential?
It's been a pleasure diving deep into this fascinating research with you.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has inspired you to embrace the elegance and wonder of mathematics. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and who knows what incredible connections you might find. Ever try to explain to someone how to tie a knot over the phone?
Yeah.
It's almost impossible.
It's really tough.
You need that visual, don't you?
Absolutely. We take for granted those shapes, but there's a whole area of mathematics dedicated to understanding those shapes called knot theory.
And that's what we're diving into today.
Yeah.
This paper, a recursive relation in the complement of the 2p12 torus knot.
Right.
Buckle up, everybody.
Yeah, that title, I can see why that might sound intimidating.
Yeah.
But it gets into some really, really interesting ideas about knots and the spaces around them and how we can study them.
So let's start with the basics.
Okay.
We're talking about torus knots.
Okay.
Give us a simple way to picture what that means.
Okay, so imagine like a donut, right? Mathematicians call that a torus. Okay.
And a torus knot is like a loop of string that's wrapped around that donut in a particular way.
So not just ANY old way of wrapping a string around.
Exactly, yeah. It has to be a very specific kind of looping around that donut.
Okay, so very precise.
Yes.
Got it. So we've got our donut, we've got our very specifically placed string. What's next?
Right. So every knot has what's called a complement. And that complement is basically everything that's not the knot.
Okay.
So if you think about that donut, it's like all the air around the donut and even the air inside the hole of the donut, that would be the complement.
So if the knot is the donut and the string, the complement is all that empty space.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, got it.
A delicious analogy.
I like it. And what's really, I think, fascinating about the paper we're looking at is that it focuses on a knot, like a loop of string, that's actually located within the complement of another knot.
Okay.
And this other knot is a very specific kind of torus knot called a 2p12 torus knot.
So we've got a knot inside of another knot's complement.
That's right.
That seems awfully abstract.
It is abstract.
Like, why do we even care?
It's a good question. And that's, I think, where the beauty of math comes in, because it turns out that by studying these really abstract relationships, we can actually reveal some very deep truths about the nature of shapes and spaces.
Okay, so we've got our donut knot, and then we've got this other knot hanging out in the space around it. How in the world do mathematicians even begin to study something like that? What are the tools?
That's a great question. So one really important tool that they use is something called the colored Jones polynomial.
Polynomials. Okay.
Yeah.
Like back in algebra class.
Exactly. Yeah, like remember those equations with x's and exponents?
Right.
It might seem strange, but it turns out that you can use those kinds of equations to describe and categorize different knots.
Okay.
And the colored part just means that we're adding a little bit of extra information to those polynomials. So instead of just having x's, we might have x's and y's, or we might assign colors to different parts of the knot. And that helps us see patterns and connections that we wouldn't otherwise be able to see.
So it's almost like a secret code embedded in the knot.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great way to think about it.
Okay.
And so what this paper does that I think is so cool is that it takes this idea of this colored Jones polynomial.
Right.
And it applies it in this new situation where we have a knot living inside another knot's complement. And by doing that, they find a brand new mathematical relationship that governs how these polynomials behave in this setting.
And this relationship, this new finding, is that the theorem that we see?
Exactly. So they have a theorem, theorem 1.1, that describes this relationship.
Okay, so this theorem, it's basically a new rule, a new equation that tells us how these things relate to each other in this very specific situation.
Precisely. Yeah, it's like a new formula or a new rule that we can use to understand how these knot polynomials work.
Mm-hmm.
And while the actual equation itself might not mean a whole lot to someone who's not a mathematician,
Right.
for mathematicians, this is a really exciting discovery because it's a new connection that they found between these different concepts.
So you're saying that this theorem helps mathematicians understand how these knot polynomials work in a much broader range of situations.
Exactly, yeah. It's like we've expanded our toolkit and now we can tackle more problems that we couldn't before.
That's pretty cool.
It is cool. But here's the thing. To prove this theorem,
Okay.
they had to go on a little bit of a mathematical journey.
Okay.
And this journey took them through a rather, well, it's a fascinating shape, but it's a little bit complicated to describe. It's called the genus 2 handle body.
Oh boy. Okay. Genus 2 handle body.
Yeah.
That already sounds intimidating.
I know.
When in the world I assess that, and how does it relate to knots?
Okay, so imagine you have a sphere,
Yeah.
right? Like a ball, but instead of being smooth, it has two handles attached to it. Kind of like imagine a donut,
Okay.
but it's been like thickened up
Okay.
and has an extra loop on it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what this genus 2 handle body is.
Hmm.
It's a little hard to picture without like a visual aid.
Right.
But the important thing is that inside this handle body, there are certain curves. And in the paper, they actually give these curves names. They call them X, Y, and Z.
Okay.
And these curves are really important because they, in a way, they kind of like interact with our knot and its complement. And by understanding how these curves behave, the authors were able to figure out how to prove their theorem.
So, to get a handle on these complicated knots, we've got to go to this other world of multi-handled spheres. It's like one of those video games where you have to go through the hidden door to solve a puzzle in the main world.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
Yes.
So by exploring this handle body world and figuring out how these curves like interact with the knot's complement, they were able to discover something really powerful. They found like a kind of shortcut formula for calculating those really complicated colored Jones polynomials that we were talking about.
Okay, so instead of having to go through all those complex calculations every time,
Exactly.
they've found a way to kind of like take a shortcut.
Yeah.
I bet mathematicians love that kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely. It simplifies things considerably. Like, think about it's sort of like if you had a really complex sequence of numbers and you were trying to figure out what the next number in the sequence was. This would be like finding a pattern in that sequence that allows you to predict the next number without having to go through all the previous steps.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. But this recurrence polynomial,
Yeah.
it's more than just a shortcut, right?
Right.
The paper seems to suggest that it might have even like a deeper meaning, right?
Yeah, you're picking up on something really important there, which is that, at the end of the paper, they actually pose this question,
Yeah.
which is, does this recurrence polynomial tell us something fundamental about the geometry of these knots? Like, is there something more to it than just being a shortcut for calculations?
It's like they found a mysterious key, but they don't quite know what lock it opens.
That's a great way to put it.
But they do leave us with a couple of hints, right?
They do?
About where to even start looking for this deeper meaning.
Yeah. So one thing they suggest is that, maybe if we explore the relationship between this recurrence polynomial and something called the Kauffman bracket.
Okay, the Kauffman bracket, now we're really getting into the weeds here. For our listeners who don't have PhDs in knot theory,
Right.
what are we even talking about there?
So imagine you're looking at a knot through like a special kind of lens.
Yeah.
One that highlights certain properties
Okay.
that you wouldn't be able to see just by looking at the knot with your naked eye.
Okay.
And that's kind of what the Kauffman bracket does. It's like a different way of looking at the knot
Okay.
and understanding its properties and its polynomial.
So by switching to these different perspectives, these different like mathematical lenses,
Yeah.
they think they might be able to uncover some meanings that they couldn't see before.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's like we're getting a new perspective on the problem, and maybe that will give us some insights that we didn't have before.
Okay, so they're putting on the Kauffman bracket glasses
Exactly.
to get a new view of this. And what is it that they see when they do that?
Okay, so one really interesting observation that they make is that when they make a small change to their formula,
Okay.
they change one of the values. It's a variable called t in the formula.
Okay.
When they set that t value to the value of 1, something really interesting happens. The whole polynomial, like, simplifies dramatically.
Really?
Yeah, it's like all these terms just, like, collapse and disappear, and you're left with something much simpler.
So you're saying just by tweaking this one little value in the formula, suddenly this whole complex equation it's like
It becomes very
it
elegant.
reveals a hidden simplicity.
Exactly.
But why does that happen?
It's a great question, and they don't have a definitive answer, but their hunch is that it has something to do with the underlying geometry of the knot.
Okay.
Like somehow by setting it equal to 1, we're kind of like aligning the polynomial with the geometry in just the right way so that it reveals a hidden structure that was always there.
So they're like peering through this mathematical lens, they're tweaking a few things here and there, and boom,
Yeah.
hidden structure just kind of pops out at them.
It's true. And that's, I think, what makes this paper so exciting is that it's not just about like, finding the answer to one specific problem, but it's about like opening up these new avenues of exploration in knot theory.
It's like those old maps you see in like adventure movies.
Right.
It's like, here be dragons. This
It's-
paper is like charting those territories.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that, sometimes the most fascinating discoveries come from those moments where we're kind of venturing into uncharted territory and we don't know what we're going to find.
Yeah. Well, speaking of uncharted territory, I think we've gone about as deep as we can go for today.
Right.
But for our listener who's been patiently following along with us on this journey,
Right.
what would you say is like the big takeaway message from all of this, the aha moment they should be having?
Yeah, I think if there's one thing I want listeners to take away from this, it's that, math is not just about memorizing formulas or
Right.
crunching numbers.
It's not just times tables.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about exploration. It's about finding elegant patterns and connections in the most unexpected places.
Well, and we really saw that today, right? We started with something as simple as a knot.
Right.
And we ended up in this world of multi-handled spheres and secret codes and...
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how these things all connect together.
It is really, it makes you appreciate the beauty and the power of mathematics when you see how these things can be used to kind of unlock these deeper truths.
Absolutely, yeah, and it reminds us that, even these really abstract mathematical concepts, they often have their roots in the real world, you know. They're inspired by the shapes and the spaces that we encounter every day.
So next time you're tying your shoe,
yeah,
or struggling with, a tangled up extension cord,
right.
Just take a moment to appreciate the hidden mathematical universe that's at play.
There's a lot more to knots than meets the eye.
There is, and I'm sure there are plenty of other mathematical mysteries out there just waiting to be unraveled.
Absolutely.
So until our next deep dive into the world of knowledge,
yes,
keep those minds curious and never stop exploring.
Great advice. Ever tied your shoes and thought, hey, there's some serious math going on here?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe not, but get this, knots. Those twisty things we deal with every day are a big deal in the world of mathematics.
They really are. You wouldn't believe the complex equations and patterns hidden within these seemingly simple loops.
And that's what we're digging into today. We've got a real head-scratcher of a research paper. A recursive relation in the complement of the 2p12 torus knot.
Ooh.
Sounds intimidating.
Yeah.
We'll untangle it all, I promise. But first, to appreciate this paper, we need a little background on why mathematicians are so obsessed with knots in the first place.
It's all about the challenge, really. Knots are like visual puzzles. They seem so straightforward when you look at them, but try describing their properties mathematically, and things get incredibly complex.
Yeah.
Incredibly fast.
So it's not just about tying sailors' knots, then.
Definitely not. Knot theory has come a long way from its nautical roots. It's become this fascinating area of mathematics with implications for fields like physics, even understanding how things get tangled at the subatomic level.
Okay. Mind officially boggled. But let's get back to this particular knot we're exploring today. What makes the 2p12 torus knot so special that it warranted an entire research paper?
Well, imagine a donut. Go on. Picture it in all its glazed glory.
So you're speaking my language.
Okay. Imagine tying a knot that lives only on the surface of that donut. That's essentially what a torus knot is, with the torus being the mathematical term for that donut shape, the numbers in the name, 2p12. Tell us how the knot is wound around the donut. It's like a set of instructions for a very specific, very elegant donut knot.
So, the numbers tell us if it's a single loop, a double loop, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And it dictates how many times the knot goes around the donut's hole and how many times it goes around the donut itself before connecting back up.
Okay, starting to get a visual here. Now, the paper also mentions something called the complement of the knot. Is that like the opposite of the knot?
Not quite the opposite, but think about it this way. You have your donut, and you have your knot on its surface. The complement is all the space around that knot, still on the surface of the donut, but not part of the knot itself.
So imagine frosting on the donut. The knot is like a design you pipe on with icing, and the complement is all the yummy frosting around it.
That's a great way to put it. And you might think that empty space wouldn't be very interesting, but it turns out the complement holds a lot of clues about the knot itself, mathematically speaking.
Like looking at the negative space in a photograph. It tells you just as much about the subject as the subject itself. This is where it starts to feel like a detective story.
Right.
When we have the knot, the scene of the crime, and now we're investigating the empty space around it for clues.
I like the way you think.
Yeah.
And in this case, the mathematicians who wrote this paper were searching for a very specific type of mathematical equation, a recursive relation that would unlock the secrets hidden within the complement of this torus knot.
Okay. Time to pause for a second because I think recursive relation deserves its own moment in the spotlight. We'll be diving into that right after the quick break. We're back. And before the break, we were teetering on the edge of a fascinating mathematical concept, recursive relations. Lay it on us. What exactly is a recursive relation?
Well, Imagine you're baking your grandma's famous cookies from her handwritten recipe card. You add a pinch of this, a dash of that, following each step in a specific order. That's kind of how a recursive relation works, except instead of flour and sugar, you're dealing with numbers and equations.
Okay, so a recipe for mathematicians. But instead of delicious cookies,
Yeah.
we get a deeper understanding of knots.
You got it. It's like a step-by-step process where each step depends on the one before it. The mathematicians in this case were looking for a recursive relation that would help them understand the increasingly complex parts of that donut-shaped space around the knot.
So it's like having a map, but instead of fixed landmarks, the landmarks are constantly being generated based on where you are and where you've been.
That's a great way to put it. And the exciting part is they actually found the recursive relation they were looking for.
No way.
Huh.
So they cracked the code. What does that even look like? Did they whip out a giant chalkboard covered in equations?
The equation itself does involve some pretty high-level math, something called Chebyshev polynomials, which we won't get into now, but trust me, it's impressive. But the real breakthrough here isn't just the equation itself, it's what this equation allows mathematicians to do.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. Tell me more.
This recursive relation acts like a powerful lens, allowing mathematicians to zoom in on the knot's complement and examine its structure in a systematic way. It gives them a tool to navigate and make predictions about this complex space, which wasn't possible before.
It's like they had a basic roadmap before, but now they have a detailed GPS system that can guide them through all the twists and turns of this mathematical knot.
Precisely. And that's huge because, remember, understanding the complement of a knot can unlock secrets about the knot itself. It's like having a secret decoder ring that reveals hidden messages.
This is where it gets really interesting for me. We've gone from tying our shoelaces to unlocking hidden messages in mathematical knots. But now for the million-dollar question, why should we care about these knotty secrets? What's the bigger picture here? So we've got this recursive relation, this powerful tool, but it sounds like it's not a case of mystery solved, everyone go home.
Right.
What are mathematicians still trying to figure out about these torus knots?
Yeah, you're right. It's definitely not case closed. It's more like, this recursive relation has opened a new door in a vast and intricate mansion of mathematics. We've peeked inside one room, but there are countless others waiting to be explored.
So even with this new tool, these torus knots still hold mysteries for mathematicians.
Absolutely. Think about it like this. You can give two bakers the same recipe, but they might interpret it slightly differently, add their own flourishes, or even discover hidden depths to the recipe that no one else noticed before.
Oh, I like that. So mathematicians are like culinary explorers,
Yeah.
riffing off the same basic recipe to create something totally new and unexpected.
Exactly. In this case, the recursive relation provides a framework for understanding these knots, but it doesn't answer every question. There's still so much to discover about how these knots behave, the nuances of their structure, and how they connect to other areas of mathematics.
Speaking of connections, I have to ask about something else mentioned in this paper, something called colored Jones polynomials. Now, I'm not even going to try and pretend I understand what those are, but they sound fascinating.
They are fascinating and incredibly complex without going too deep into the weeds. Colored Jones polynomials are like another set of tools that mathematicians use to study knots, kind of like having different types of magnifying glasses to examine the same object.
So this research, with its recursive relation discovery, is just one piece of a much larger puzzle that mathematicians are still putting together.
Exactly, and that's the beauty of it. We often think of mathematics as this fixed, rigid subject, but really, it's more like an ever-expanding universe, full of mysteries and surprises waiting to be uncovered.
And to me,
Yeah.
that's what makes this deep dive so satisfying. We've journeyed from the familiar world of shoelaces and donuts to the frontiers of mathematical research, all through exploring one single elegant knot.
It's amazing what a little curiosity can unravel, isn't it?
It really is. And on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought. What other hidden patterns and connections are waiting to be discovered, not just in the realm of mathematics, but in the world around us? Keep those minds curious, and we'll catch you in our next deep dive.